Hi everyone, welcome to Cloud Rangers Microsoft Azure Training, the 2018 edition. I'm Sean Ismail, and the contact information is at the blue bar below for myself as well as everything about this course. Okay, so today is a continuation of Module 2, which is implementing and managing Azure networking, and we are on Lesson 2, Part 2, implementing and managing virtual networks. So if you haven't watched the Part 1, I strongly suggest that you go and do so. I'll put a link in the YouTube's description below. So if you haven't watched that, please go and do so because this is just a continuation. In the previous lesson, part one, we talked about how to implement and manage virtual networks using the Azure portal. We're going to follow the same example, but this time we are going to do this in Azure PowerShell and Azure CLI. So in one of the previous modules, I talked about different ways you can interact with Azure, like how you can implement and manage things on Azure. And this is just a brief description as a review. So one thing we already know, to interact with Azure, you can use the Azure portal, which is the GUI or the graphical user interface of doing things in Azure. But there are other ways too, like you have Azure PowerShell, Azure CLI, Azure ARM templates, or Azure SDK. So with Azure PowerShell, it's basically your de facto command line interface with most Windows operating system these days. If you are not fully aware of how PowerShell works, there's a lot of resources online. You could refer that to learn the basics of PowerShell, but you need the basics of PowerShell to actually succeed in learning Azure PowerShell because it's related. If you're trying to learn everything at once right now, it might be a little hard. So I hope that you have some PowerShell experience. So that's one way you can do everything in PowerShell with the Azure module installed for Azure PowerShell, and then you can create resources, manage resources, delete them, and do everything pretty much what you can do from the portal. Okay. Azure PowerShell, I mentioned that it is typically on the Windows systems, but some of you may already know that Microsoft PowerShell is now also available in Linux environment. So if you are using PowerShell from the Linux environment, this lesson should be the same. You should be able to do it from anywhere. It's good on Microsoft, the way I look at it, that they're supporting a lot of their tools on the open source environment these days. So if you have a Linux system, get your PowerShell installed and take it from there. If you do not know how to, like I mentioned in one of my previous modules, I actually showed how to do that in Windows environment as well as Linux environments. Then comes Azure CLI, and the current version is 2.0. CLI is command line interface. It's primarily meant for having this, from Linux environment. Like it's more native to Linux environments where you can, interact with Azure once again, very similar to PowerShell, and that's what I'll show you today. You can have Azure CLI also installed on Windows. So you see, PowerShell was to be typically Windows. It can be used on Linux right now, and CLI was a Linux thing. It can also be used in Windows. So the common question I get is that should I just pick one? Like, should I do PowerShell or should I just do CLI? Because they'll do the same thing. They're both command line interfaces. I mean, using command line interface. Well, for your exam, you kind of need to know both. So I would suggest that any example that you're doing in PowerShell, you might as well do it in CLI and vice versa. From your exam perspective, I mean, they want you to know both. In real life, in real life production scenarios, it really depends on you. Some people have a liking for PowerShell, some people have a liking for CLI, just because it's no different from a language, right? Like different language have different capabilities to a certain point, but most of it is usually the same. So, I mean, it serves the same purpose. You write an application or service or whatever. So very similarly, it's up to you. But for your exam perspective, you need both. Then the other thing that comes in, and this is new, is Azure Resource Manager templates, or it's typically called as ARM, ARM. You'll see that referenced in Azure Docs a lot. Um, it's basically JSON scripts. So rather than having PowerShell and CLI, where we call it very procedural, you execute one line, then you execute another line. With JSON scripts, the idea is it's very descriptive. So you basically write a description of a network you want or a virtual machine you want, and Azure has a way to go and take that JSON script and execute and build your environment. I'm not going to go into the ARM templates in this lesson because there'll be one entire module where I will go over how to create ARM templates and how to do all this work that we are doing here. But this lesson will become really big, and ARM has, I mean, there's a lot of nuances that you have to take care of and quirks that you have to go through. So I'm not going to make it part of this lesson, but it's very important. It's going to be on your exam as well. And that is the preferred way of deploying anything in Azure these days. And like I mentioned, that everything in PowerShell and CLI is very procedural. You execute one line, you wait, you execute another one. So if you're creating one virtual machine, you wait for that virtual machine creation to finish till you get to the other one. With JSON script, you can actually have resources created in parallel. So it makes the deployment time really short. So that's the preferred way. But having said that, that's not the focus of this lesson today. And the last way to interact with Azure is Azure SDK, the software development kit. This is where if you want to use other languages, if you want to use C Sharp or you want to use Python, you want to use other languages to actually build ways to implement or manage something in Azure, right? I mean, some of you may prefer, and this is way beyond the focus of this entire course, actually. So you don't have to worry about that, but you need to know that these are the ways to implement things on Azure. Okay. Um, so by now, if you watched my previous module, um, please go and do so because I am expecting that you already have either PowerShell, PowerShell and CLI installed in your Windows machine or Mac or Linux or whatever you are using, because I'm not going to show you in this lesson at all. So you might as well watch the previous one. Now, the previous module where I actually go over that. Now, for the lazy ones, if you don't think that you don't have the time and everything to do that right now, I'm going to use today something called as Azure's Cloud Shell. So Azure now in the portal gives you a Cloud Shell where it basically has an interface to PowerShell. It also has an interface to the Azure CLI. So you don't have to do anything on your local computer. You can do everything on the browser itself. Okay. So if you, I strongly suggest you watch the previous module, but if you can't, you can actually do this. So this way we don't get stuck. And some of you are probably watching this the first time. It will help you a little bit. The editor I use is actually Visual Studio Code. I'll have a link in the on the GitHub where you can actually go to the Visual Studio Code's website and download it for free. Lately, that has become my pretty de facto editor for everything because you can use Visual Studio Code on Windows machine, on your Macs, or on your Linux systems. It's very cross-platform editor, and I really, really like it. So most of my editing I do over there. I'm going to have everything in Visual Studio Code, but I'm going to take those, copy and paste those in Cloud Shell, and we'll take it from there. Okay, so enough talking about things here. Let's first get started with Azure PowerShell. So the goal of this lesson is exactly to build the same thing that we did in the previous lesson through the GUI. It's going to be the same diagram. It's going to be the same virtual network, same name, same subnets, same virtual machines. Okay. So anything you did in the portal, you should be able to do it from PowerShell and CLI. So that's the goal of that. And we are going to start with the PowerShell first. So Azure networking using Azure PowerShell. These are the commandlets, right? In PowerShell, these are called commandlets. They are very specific to the Azure module. So if you recall, the first thing we had done was create a resource group. The way you do that in Azure PowerShell is use this commandlet, new Azure RM, which means resource manager, resource group. And that's how you create it. How do you create a new subnet configuration? New Azure RM Virtual Network Subnet Config. How do you create an Azure Virtual Network? New Azure RM. Once again, RM stands for Resource Manager Virtual Network. How do you create a new public address? How do you create a new interface, network interface? They're all over here. These are just the commandlets you sort of have to remember. They take a lot of parameters, as you can imagine, because when we say new Azure RM resource group by itself, it's not going to do anything. You have to tell it what's the name of the resource group, what's the location of the resource group. The reason PowerShell helps you learn more than the portal is because when you do things in PowerShell, you have to remember or you have to kind of get used to knowing what the requirements are. Like if you have created resource group many, many times, you know that it needs the name for sure and it needs a location for sure. So when you have this commandlet, you remember that. I mean, that's how I learned that, okay, in a resource group, you at least need those two information. Are you going to be tested on this in your exam? You absolutely will be. They're not going to trick you so much and be like, okay, why don't you write the entire script or the entire commandlet of how to create a virtual network? But they will give you different options with these commandlets and say that will this commandlet, actually create what it says it will? Can you find out what's the right commandlet or anything else? So you have to remember this a little bit, and that's why I have put them over here. Now, Azure has hundreds of commandlets. Do you have to remember them all? No, you don't, because it's impossible. But you have to remember the main ones as much as possible, okay? So remember this commandlets because these are the ones we are primarily going to use to actually create the virtual network, IP addresses, network interface, and all of that. Now, similar to my last lesson where we created the virtual machines, I did not get into too much details about how we created the virtual machine. But in Azure PowerShell, there's a way to create virtual machines as well. Those commandlets are not here, if you may notice, because my focus of this lesson is really Azure networking and not building virtual machines. But like I mentioned in my previous lesson, you need to, create virtual machines so you can interact, you have a full solution. So on the, I mean, in this lesson, I'll actually create virtual machines in PowerShell as well, but I'm not going to focus so much about it. And by the way, the whole script and everything will be on GitHub, so you can actually go download it and you can start working on your own or refer it or print it and do whatever. So I'll go over those commandlets really fast, but not really cover them. So let's get started. So I'm going to be on my machine over here, which I use to do everything. As you can see in my resource group, everything is empty. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is now, like I keep saying, if you watch my previous module, you have your PowerShell already installed. I mean, PowerShell is most likely already installed on your operating system. If you want to get the Azure module installed in there, if you're on a Linux system, I do not know. Go ahead and get it ready. It should be ready by now for you to go. But the Cloud Shell that I was talking about is something that you see over here. This allows you to do both PowerShell and CLI right from the browser. It's not my preferred choice, but I'm just doing that to make sure that you guys are not stuck if you cannot get your PowerShell or CLI going watching the other module. So let's go over here. If you click on that, the very first time, it will actually ask you to set that up, and it's very simple. I've showed that in the previous module as well, but um, it is going to, I mean, I deleted my previous Cloud Shell, so it's having some issues over here. But anyways, when you start this, it will try to restart your Cloud Shell and it will set things up for you. You'll be probably shown welcome to Cloud Shell. It's basically asking that which one do you want, select Bash or PowerShell. Like I mentioned, if you have already done that, you are not going to see this screen. I'm showing this screen because it's the first time I'm doing so. So we'll start with PowerShell. So let's start with PowerShell. It's asking which subscription. So this is the subscription. I would actually go to the advanced settings over here and show you that what it's actually going to create for you. So go to advanced settings. It's saying that I need a resource group. Just like anything else, it needs a resource group. So I'll create a resource group. I'll just call it Ranger Cloud Shell Resource Group. Obviously, you're going to type something that you want. It's asking it needs a storage account. If you don't understand what's a storage account, don't worry about it. I'll just say Ranger Shell Store. This is where, stuff is going to be stored. And it's asking for a file share Ranger Shell FS for file share. Okay. Name whatever you want over here and do create storage. What it will do is going to create the resources in the backend in the Azure on Azure to actually run this shell for you because it stores certain configuration and everything. Okay, so let it create over here. It takes a little bit of time because it needs to create the storage account. So I'm going to pause and come back when it's created. Um, Okay, so as you can see, it already started. Your cloud drive has been created. It's showing the subscription with the information. It's now initializing your account for Cloud Shell. And it succeeded. It's now connecting. It's actually not taking that long right now. Sometimes it takes a lot longer. And the good part is that I'm in PowerShell. It's in preview, by the way. It actually has access to your subscription, right? So you don't have to authenticate and anything. It takes all the information for your authentication from the portal you have, and it already put it in the PowerShell. Okay, so this is one very interesting way of doing this. So let's do clear. It'll clear the screen. Now, I'm going to show you. So you can obviously make this full screen and you can bring it up and down. So it gives you a little bit of info. So you can interact both ways, right? So let's go to resource group. We should see a resource group created now that it has all this information. Okay. So this is a little hard to work like this. So Microsoft has another cool thing that I'm going to show you that is called shell.azure.com. Shell.azure.com. It's HTTPS. So it will basically ask you to authenticate. So go ahead and do that. No, and it will give you the same shell that we were looking here in a full browser. It's already maximized and it's everything else. So that way you have some real estate to do everything. You can close this anytime you want. Let's come over here. As you can see, it's already here. Just because you authenticated, all the information is already here. Okay. The first thing I do over here is, this is just like your command line on Windows. If you put dir, it should show you what is there. If you do dir, you actually see over here, it shows your subscription information. So basically, this interface actually takes you to the Azure's resources interface. So the one thing I want you to do right away over here is change directory. So just do cd. I want you to do that. So that way, if I do dir, I can actually see what are the files that are there, and it's not there in the subscription. I love this mode as well, where you can actually go and see all the resources and everything. But I like staying in here, and I'll explain you in a bit why. Let's clear the screen and let's get started from here. So this is Azure PowerShell interface. If you have that installed on your computer, great. If not, your entire PowerShell is happening from the browser. Now, I already have Visual Studio Code installed and my code already in there. So this is what we are going to work on today from the PowerShell perspective. Okay, you can do this on Notepad. You can do it in your favorite editor. I just use Visual Studio Code. So if you remember on the slide, these were the commandlets we're going to use, but look how complicated, sort of, it gets over here to actually get the work done. So if you are doing this in PowerShell from your computer, anything with the hash mark over here is a comment, right? You might already know that. You probably want to run this part first, add Azure RM account. This is how you connect from your computer to the subscription, and then you can do work. You have to connect to your subscription first. So I have already connected to the subscription from the Cloud Shell. In the Cloud Shell, you don't have to connect because it took your authentication information, authorization information already. So we are going to start from here. So the first thing we know that we are going to do is create a resource group. So this is the commandlet that we talked about earlier, new Azure RM resource group. It needs a name parameter. So what's the name of the resource group? It's going to be Ranger VNet RG. That's the one I'm going to do. And I'm going to do the location. The location is going to be East US 2. So anything in PowerShell with a dollar sign like this is actually a variable. So anything you change over here, that will be reflected. So rather than putting Ranger VNet RG everywhere in all the commandlets, I'll be like, hey, I already put that information in this variable, and that's how I'm going to use it. So new Azure RM resource group. So let's first run this too, because you have to make sure the variables are already there. Let's go to the PowerShell, right click over here, paste as plain text, press enter, and it should already be there. Those variables are stored in memory. The first ever commandlet that we are going to use is new RM Azure RM resource group. So let's go create the resource group. Once I put this over here, press enter, you can see that it replies back resource group name East US and it succeeded. Don't worry about the resource ID for now. So if I go to my portal, I knew the shell one was already there. If I click refresh, I should see Ranger VNet RG. So I hope you're slowly trying to understand the simplicity of, I mean, it's a little bit complex. I'm not going to say it's complicated or hard. It's a little complex and doing this in PowerShell. But imagine, rather than going to the browser all over the place, bam, from one command, you actually created the resource group. So, let's go back so we did the resource group. That was simple. Let's show the picture of the environment we are trying to build. We are trying to build this virtual network. So if you have already watched the previous lesson, you clearly know that this was what we built. The VNet, this was the address space, two subnets over here, my subnet 1, my subnet 2. So this is the first subnet we will create, then this is the second subnet, and they're going to be this virtual machine. It's exactly the same picture we had in the previous lesson, except that we are going to do this in PowerShell. So let's start with creating the virtual network. The way you do this is new Azure RM virtual network subnet config, right? You're basically putting the configuration, you're readying up the configuration. So I'm creating my subnet 1, that's the name, and the address prefix, or the address that we want is 10.3.1.0, right? So over here 10.3.1.0 //24. So that's the subnet we are trying to create. So this is the subnet configuration. It's not creating the subnet, it's not creating the virtual network. It is just storing the configuration of that in this variable subnet1 config. Similarly, the second one, it was 10.3.2.0. So this was 10.3.2.0. I'm going to create that configuration and store that in subnet2 config as well. So they're not really doing anything except, keeping the configuration ready. So let's copy that and go to our Cloud Shell, and let's go ahead and paste that. Okay, so it did the first one. I'll press enter. I press enter a couple of times actually, because sometimes when you paste it, it executes the first one right away, but the second one it waits for you to press enter. I just press enter, so they're there. So this did not create anything. It just created the configuration. Now we are going to create the actual virtual network, my VNet with 10300 subnet. I mean the address space. So the way you are doing that is new Azure RM virtual network. It's very self-explanatory that we are creating a virtual network. It's obviously taking a resource group names, and this is the variable, if you remember, for our resource group. The name of the VNet is going to be my VNet. The address prefix, or the address space for this is 10300 /16, and the location for that is the location variable, and the sub, and we are basically saying that create the virtual network with these two subnets, and take the configuration that we have in subnet 1 config and subnet 2 config. That's the way to do that. By the way, the reason I have this little, tilde over here, not the tilde, it's a little, mark over here, that's to ensure that I'm using the second line. So the command actually does not break. I could have not done that, and this would have broken. I would have actually have them in one single line, right? So for readability, I put that over there. And you need that, you have to be very careful what you're doing with that. So anyways, let's go create the virtual network. I think it's quite self-explanatory. Pause the video, go look at the script from GitHub, and absorb it a little bit. We know what we need to create a virtual network. We need the resource group, we need a name, we need the address prefix, we need the location, and we need the subnet configuration. It allows you to think a little bit on how you're doing that. By the way, while we are creating this virtual network, I can create this by itself, but I want to make sure that I stored the object somewhere, and that's why I have the $VNet here, because when we'll be creating the virtual machine or anything else, we'll be needing that. So if I run this commandlet by itself, it will create it, but I will have no way to actually keep a hold of it. That's why I'm storing that entire output or the output object in PowerShell's case, in the VNet over here. Okay, so let's go ahead, copy that, and let's go ahead and run that. So it is actually running that. The output object type of this commandlet will be modified in the future release. If you actually read, I mean, if you're reading that, that's fine. Don't worry about that. But right now, this virtual network is being created. So if we come to our portal and we go to virtual network, we should start seeing that. So as you can see, my VNet, it has created the my VNet. Maybe it's still running a couple of other things or creating something in the back end. So we will wait. Okay, so it has finished. So if we go to our portal, go to my VNet, what have we done so far? We have given it the address space. We know it was going to be Azure provided DNS service. let's go to the address space. We should see 10300. And check this out. There should be two subnets here. My subnet 1 with this address space, my subnet 2 with this address space. So basically, we have created this virtual network with these two subnets over here. How simple was that? If you remember in the previous lesson, we had to go to the portal, we had to enter information, we had to, click next, next, go next, and do all of that. With a script or with this commandlets, it's very simple to do that. Now, moving on. Create public IP addresses for virtual machines. Let's go ahead and create a couple of public addresses. So we know that we need three public addresses for these three virtual machines over here, and that's what we are going to do over here, okay? So just give me a moment here. The way we do this is new Azure RM public IP address, the one over here, okay? That's the commandlet. What does it need? Now you should get the hang of it by now. Everything needs the resource group name. This is the variable. It needs a name. So if you remember our previous one, we called them server 1 pub IP, 2 pub IP, and 3 like that. Location. So we are putting the location where it needs to be, the location variable. And we are basically saying the allocation method is dynamic. So we are not making that static. That's fine. So I'm going to take this public IP address and store it here. This public address, once it's created, the object output object here. So server 123 public IP. Let's go create all three of them together. So let's copy all of this. Come over here, go to our Cloud Shell, paste as plain text. It's creating the first one. Takes a little time to create the public IP addresses, so we'll let that happen. And I'm pausing video in between. Some of these resources are taking or will take 30 seconds to a minute or whatever. Like you see, the first one is done right now. It's working on the second one. So I'll be back when the third one has been created. All right, so three public IP addresses should have been created. I don't see any error. So let's go over here. If they have been created, let's go to the public IP addresses over here, and we should see all the public IP addresses created over here. So just let's look at one here. Once we come over here, it's not associated to anything yet. The IP address I'm still looking for. It still looks like working in the back end to make that happen. All right, no worries. So we have the three public IP addresses created over here. The next thing we need to do is create the network interface cards or network adapters for the virtual machine. So the way we do that is new Azure RM network interface. We are saying that we need to make network interface for this server, and this server. So we are creating three of them. Now, this is where now it should almost be like Sean. Yeah, we get it because all of these commandlets will start looking the same. But what we have to remember is what is required to make them, right? So new Azure RM network interface needs the resource group, the location, the name. So everything in Azure, like I mentioned in the last lesson, everything in Azure just loves putting a name on everything. So the first one we will call it server one NIC, right? And what does it need? It needs that when you create the network interface, it needs to know which subnet it's going to be attached to. So I'm saying that I'm sorry, this moves around. I'm saying attach it to the subnet VNet. So if you remember our virtual network, and that's why we captured that object dot subnets 0, right? So what we are basically saying is that go get me the public IP address, the sub attached to that subnet, then go attach to, we created two subnets. So this is the subnet 0, and the next one will be subnet 1. It doesn't start from 1, just like arrays, if you remember in programming, it starts from 0. Also attach yourself to the server 1 public IP and give yourself the private address 10315. So basically looking at this, we are talking about this guy over here. Be with this subnet, which is the first subnet or the subnet 0. Give yourself a public IP address that we created in the previous step, server 1 pub IP, and this is the private address. We know that this is the information minimum it is required to create this network interface, right? And store that in server 1 NIC. So similar to server 1 NIC, server 2 NIC, and server 3 NICs, we need to ensure that those information are already there. So if you remember, the first server was 10315, the second server was 10316. Look at the subnet over here for the third one. The third one was in a different subnet, right? So we are putting this on subnet location number 1, and the public IP address, the private IP address for this will be 10.3.2.5 because it was on the second subnet, right? So that's what we are creating. That's the information that you need over there. So let's take all of this copy this, come over here, just like last time. You should be getting really used to this by now. Let's go ahead and paste that, and this should be created. All right, created pretty quick over here. So let's go over here, go to under network interfaces, and you should see the server NICs already created over here. They're currently not attached to any virtual machine. We have not created any virtual machine. All I want to verify over here is server 1 NIC, 10315, 10316, and 10325. So it looks okay with my diagram over here. So if I come over here, it's connected to the public IP address server 1 public IP. Perfect. If I go to IP configurations, I should see that it's using 10315 and it is static. Remember, we don't want this to be dynamic. We need this to be static. So we specify anything we specify over here makes it actually static. If you did not put this private IP address, it will go and find the first IP address like from the DHCP that's there, like I explained. So as far as this lesson is concerned, that's all you really need to know to build your virtual network because technically we have created all the network, created the subnet, created the network interface cards. It's good to go. That's why I have all these lines over here. Okay. Anything after this, you particularly do not need for this lesson, which is creating the virtual machines. But I'm going to do that from the completion point of view. Like this should be exactly the same as the previous lesson we had through command lines, PowerShell. So what am I doing here? I'm actually going to create the virtual machines. This is a little complicated. I just want to make sure that we are going to cover that in our next module. But before that, I'm giving you enough experience to actually get started. Having said that, I mean, this is good for you because right now you know how to create virtual machines and network and everything else. I mean, some people almost do this in their job every day. So this is pretty good for you. So the first thing we want to do over here is get credential. What I'm going to really breeze through this, by the way, guys, and I'm sorry if this is too fast because this is really not the goal of the lesson. Download the code and do it yourself. But what we are basically doing here is building the virtual machines. So let's get the credential for all the virtual machines. And I have all the comments over here. Acquire server credential. So basically the username and the password. So this is a fancy way of getting the username and password without actually putting this in the script so people know your password or whatever, right? So let's go over here. Let's go actually clear the screen so we have a little bit of real estate here. I'm going to go over here and paste as plain text. Let's get the credential. It's basically going to ask you for username. Put whatever username you want and put the password, whatever password you want. That's it. It just stored the credentials in server cred. Now, let's go create the virtual machine. The way to create the virtual machine first is actually create the configuration of the virtual machine. So I'm creating the server 1 VM config, and I'm going to store that here. The command that for that is new Azure RM VM config. All this configuration is taking your virtual machine name, what size do you want, what operating system you want. I'm saying I want Windows. What's going to be your computer name? I'm going to be putting here server 1. That's the computer name. And the server credential that we just captured will be already put over here. That what's going to be the credential of this virtual machine. What is the source image and publisher name? I'm saying it's Microsoft Windows Server. The offer is going to be Windows Server. It's going to be a 2016 data center, and I want the latest version. Okay, and you can see over here that I have put this because it's piping. This is the pipe, right? The pipe symbol. It's piping the rest of the information. And I'm also saying that I don't need the boot diagnostics. Let's disable that. And I do need a network interface. So the network interface over here that we created, I'm going to put the ID of this network interface. So the server one nic.id will basically attach this network interface to the first VM that we created. So nothing will be created over here. This will just be the virtual machine configuration. This is similar to in the portal when we went to create a virtual machine. You remember that form we had to fill with all those information? This is basically that information, but we are now doing this in PowerShell. Okay. Same is going to be on server 2 VM config and server 3 VM config. I want to mention something over here. In my script, anywhere where I have to put in information, I put that in double quotes. You may find example where it's done in single quotes, and that's fine. I think I left one over here for you guys to figure out. Okay, see, when we are creating the my VNet, The address prefix, I put it in single quote over here. I could have very well put double quote. I love putting double quotes, so I just do that. If you're familiar, and I mean, if you're comfortable with using single quotes, do so. You can use them interchangeably as well as you have seen. I put double quotes for everything. It's very easy visually for me to see, hey, these are the information I need to do. So if I was creating a fourth virtual machine, I would literally just take this, copy and paste this over here, go and change this information, this information, this information. And based on, maybe some of this information will still stay the same. I'm going to show you how to create a fourth one actually, rather than talking. So come over here, rather than server 3, I'm going to just call it server 4, right? And I'm going to leave everything else the same. The computer name is going to be server 4. The credential is going to be the same. I'm going to leave everything else, but I'll need a virtual network. So I don't have one created, but I would have come over here and just done 4, right? It's as simple as that. So if you feel that this is complicated, it's actually not. Just like that, I created a configuration for, let's change this one. It will be 4 config. You're good to go. You created the fourth virtual machine or the configuration of the fourth machine, right? So it's actually pretty simple. And I put the double quotes so I can easily remember what I have to go and change. So we have gotten the credentials. I'm going to take all 3 of these configurations and go bam. So let's copy this. Let's go to the Cloud Shell over here, copy and paste that. So it's creating the first config, it's creating the second config, it's going and creating the third config over here, and we should be good to go. It did not create anything. It just created the configuration, all these objects, and stored them over here. We are going to create the virtual machine now. So the way to create, so this was new Azure RM VM config. The way to create the new virtual machine is new Azure RM VM. It's actually pretty simple. All it requires is the resource group and the location, and dash VM and the entire service, the config that we have created over here. So the very first one will just create the virtual machine 1. The second one will be the second config. The third one will be the third config. This is where it takes a little bit of time, and this is what I mean by procedural. Like it will create one virtual machine, then it will create the second virtual machine, then it will create, so till one completes, it will keep going, right? There is, okay, so I'm going to copy all of this, and this will actually create the virtual machines. By the way, just to review, this is creating the virtual machine with this config file. This config file is basically saying that use this network card, and this network card over here knew to where to go, like which subnet to go, which network to go, and everything else, right? That's why we are not re-specifying that. It's already in there. So let's go ahead and, I mean, that's how the connections are made. That's what I'm basically getting to. So let's come over here and clear the screen, and let's go create the virtual machines. So it's creating the first one. Once the first one will be created, the second one will be there, the third one will be there. It takes a little bit of time. If you remember the previous lesson, it takes a little bit of time for the virtual machines to be created, but you should be able to come over here and see it's already creating. I think it should already start creating server 1. Yeah, it already started creating server 1. You can click on refresh and you can see when it's running means it's up and running. But for now, it's just creating the first one. Let's go over here. Yeah, it's still working on the first one. I have noticed that sometime in the portal, it's a quirk that it has, that sometimes the status will keep saying running, and refresh will still say it's running. You have to go and refresh the entire browser to actually come and get the status updated. So if I create on that, I mean, I know it's still probably creating and not running yet, but I'm saying that if you see it's in creating for too long, just go ahead and refresh the entire browser. Okay, so let's see what's going on here. It's still on the first one. All right, I'll come back once the first one is created. All right, I'm still waiting. It's still running this one, but I can come over here and I can see server 1 actually is up and running right now. I'm still waiting the shell to come back and start creating the second one. It's probably still doing stuff at the back end. So I'll pause for a little bit. Yeah, took about good 2-3 minutes. Now it started creating server 2. So once we come over here, we should start server 2 starting to create. Okay, so it's creating server 2 right now. Be point to creating server 2. Well, I guess I'm going to wait rather than making you guys wait over here and create all the virtual machines by the time. I mean, when it's all up and running, I'll come back at that point. All right, my friends, this took a little while, but all our 3 virtual machines are up and running. Okay, so at this point, we are completed in building this environment with this virtual network, subnets, and virtual machines. And we did not even go to the GUI to create anything. Everything happened through the PowerShell from the shell over here. So three virtual machines, and we are done. I want to go to server one. Let's just verify, right? It got its public IP address. It looks like it's okay. Go to networking. In networking, I should see server one NIC should be attached to it. The private IP address was 10.3.1.5. It was part of subnet one. So let's go to the virtual networks here. I want to see all the connected devices. So in the connected devices, I should see server one NIC 10.3.1.5.6.2.5. So essentially, we are completed in building this entire environment through Azure PowerShell. Now, in here, I have commented a bunch of stuff where I show how to remove this entire resource group. So we'll be running that in a bit. But I have some other helpful commandlets. So far, we have created everything. Now, how to actually view something. So you can actually, for example, do get Azure RM resource group. So you can actually run this over here and see all the resource group that this subscription has. So as you can see, it was new. So the verb was new, create, and all of that. But get is the one that should show you how to retrieve info. So we have two resource groups, as you can see, it's going and getting that. There's more over here. Get some virtual network, put your resource group name and everything else. It will show you what virtual network you have, all the public IP addresses that you have, network interface. Similar commandlets are there for actually the virtual machine. But I commented them just so you can have it for your future reference and play around with it and see what you can do over here. Now, I'm going to show you one last interesting thing over here before I finish the PowerShell portion of this. I promise I'll keep this short. I have commented all this to only keep the commandlets that are the most important for you, okay? So one thing we are going to do first is remove everything. I mean, remove this resource group we just have created. So let's come over here and I'm going to come to a clean slate over here once again, which you should be doing. Remove Azure RM resource group and name of the resource group. Guys, let me explain you, and I want to take time to explain this to you because this is very important. Do not go to the portal and just delete a resource group without thinking about it many, many, many times, especially if you are doing this through any sort of a script, right? Like we did in PowerShell. This commandlet over here has the power to go and delete your entire resource group, means you are going to essentially destroy this whole environment. For our purpose, this is a lab, this is okay to do. Can you imagine you have hundreds of virtual machines, subnets, networks, and everything in one resource group? We keep everything in one resource group. What happens if you delete that in production? One, you can pretty much say bye bye to your job because that's essentially destroying an entire data center in on premises world, right? You're basically destroying all the server, all the network, all the switches, everything. In cloud, it's very, very easy to do so. So be very careful before you push those commandlets or go to the portal and delete a resource group. In your lab, I know you'll get very comfortable in going and deleting resource groups. In production, once a resource group is created, we rarely touch it at the resource group level because, in real world, this resource group over here, the one over here, is probably your entire data center, right? So don't destroy your data center. That's all I'm telling you. So let's remove that. Remove Azure RM resource group. I have already in the variable put the resource group name, so I know this is going to work out. It's actually asking you, confirm, are you sure you want to remove the resource group ranger vnet rg? I'm going to press yes. This is where you think 100 times and you do that. What it will do when we come back over here is see that this resource group will be completely destroyed with all the resources that it has. So right now you can see it's deleting all these resources. It's actually going to be all gone. Okay, so we'll let that happen in the back end. Now let's go back over here. One last thing. So like I mentioned, I commented everything over here to make this a self-sufficient script. What does this mean? You and I just went line by line on doing this. In real world, you'll probably not do this line by line. You'll probably run this script all at once. Means you'll have the entire environment that we have over here created. You'll just put the command and you'll just go have coffee, come back, and you'll see it's good to go. Okay, this is what we mean by, the DevOps philosophy. Couple of things we have done over there. We have automated the entire build of this environment. Okay, we have wrote the entire infrastructure as code. So you'll be hearing this a lot: IAC, infrastructure as code, DevOps. By the way, DevOps is not a technology, it's a philosophy, right? It's a way of framework thinking that, hey, I'm going to do certain things in certain way. So we have wrote our entire infrastructure in code that we are going to deploy, and it's all automated. Now, you could have this automated deployment by either taking this script and deploying it yourself, or you could have a CI/CD, continuous, integration or continuous development pipeline through Jenkins or Visual Studio Team Services or TFS. You know, by the way, if these buzzwords don't make sense to you, don't worry about it. But I'm certain people will know. You can hook up this entire script with Jenkins and go to Jenkins and run the job, and it will go and create this environment for you in your Azure subscription or VSTS, Visual Studio Team Services or Team Foundation Server, whatever they call it these days. That's what it is, guys. This is infrastructure as code, and you should be streamlining this with your entire process. Now, if you are a developer or if you are giving this script to a developer, all they have to do is change, the variables that we have over here, and they can build their environment in a go. They don't have to know what's networking. They don't have to know what's subnet. They don't have to know anything. They just know that I'm going to run this script. My environment is going to be ready. I'm going to be concentrating writing code for the application on these virtual machines, right? They just want a test environment. You just give them the script and you get away, and they can do this all the time by themselves, multiple times. Like, we can change the resource group name over here to something else and create multiple environments all there. It's very good if you're a product developer or application developer. You don't have to get into the details. And if you're a systems guy, you can just go and give this to them, right? And say that, hey, you can now run this on your own. You don't need me to come and build this environment for you all the time. Okay. um, and that's the DevOps philosophy, that people should be able to do this instantly in an automated fashion. I don't have to go build this environment over and over again for all my developers. I can just take this script, change everything, and give it to them. So let's come over here and see if this is gone yet. It's still deleting by the looks of it. So while this happens, I'm going to show you how to run this entire thing together from the Cloud Shell, okay? Bear with me. I know the duration of this video is going a little high, but let's see what you can do here. I think it's not going to let me do that right now. Let's just wait and let this resource group deletion finish here. All right, so that has completed. So let's come back over here, click refresh, bam, it's gone. Okay, so let's go ahead and clear this screen. And this is where I told you earlier to press that change directory to make sure you are in this prompt. Let's clear the screen. I'll tell you in a bit why. I'm going to do dir. So as you can see, there's really the cloud drive and Windows share. These are the two directories or folders that are there. There's no other file. I have saved this file as vnet.ps1. Do not change anything from here, okay? Download this from GitHub and change only, well, you probably want to change the resource group for yourself and the location, but you don't have to change anything else over here. So vnet.ps1, this is how PowerShell, by the way, that's the extension, it's there. I'm going to go ahead and see this little thing over here. It's called upload download files, the one over here. I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to say I'm going to upload a file. So click on upload. And in upload, I'm going to go to the lesson 2. So this is the file I need. I mean, you may have saved this somewhere else on your computer. Just go and pick that up from there. I'm going to say, let's go ahead and upload that. It says upload to destination complete. So if I do dir, I should see vnet.ps1 over here. So all I have to do, so right now, as you can see, there's nothing over here. All I have to do is, if I got this right, uh, get to the current directory, vnet.ps1. That's all I should have to do. Press enter. You may name something else. As you can see, it's going through this entire script right now and building everything for you, right? So seems like the resource group is already created. Come and click over here. Resource group is created. So I'm going to pause over here and let it finish the whole thing. If everything goes okay, we should have this entire environment created without us interacting at all with Azure, right? Now, Just imagine the power of this. You can have your entire data center created in one script, and you can use that as almost like your backup, right? I mean, to create. I mean, of course, if you now have stuff on the virtual machines you created and all that, the backup doesn't work. I'm just, very superficially and high level way saying that. But it's entire backup of this entire environment. What does this do to your development of your organization, right? I mean, all the developers, they can have the entire environment with all the machines built for them every single time, right? This is the power of what you keep hearing in IT these days about automation. We automated this entire build, right? When we come back over here, we will see the entire environment has been built over here. So it's waiting for the username and password because I have kept this interactive for a good reason. Um, but you have ways of taking this username and password in this script as well and give it to people, right? I mean, it can be just another variable which they can pass in and do that, but there's nothing else for us to touch here. If I go to virtual network, I don't know. See, it's already started creating the virtual network. I'm assuming network interfaces are created yet. Yep, network interfaces have been created already, right? Public IP address will probably take a little bit of time. See, it's already creating all of this in the backend for you. So let's see. And I know the virtual machines will probably take a little bit of time. So maybe it started creating the virtual machines. Let's see. Yeah, it's started creating the server one. I just want to show you the power of this, guys. I mean, I hope you're as excited as I am. And I mean, you can probably feel that I have that excitement right now because this is amazing. In the previous lesson, we went one by one to all of these things and created this, and with scripts, we did it one by one line at a time. But we are doing this whole damn thing right now automated, right? So I'll come back once this whole thing is created, and we are going to move on to using the Azure CLI to do everything. Okay, so let's wait over here. All right, guys. So took a few minutes, but end of the day, all my virtual machines are up and running, right? So I'm not going to spend too much time. All I wanted to show you is that how the script, I mean, I can take all this commandlets, make a script, put it in PowerShell's Cloud Shell, or if you're doing this from your desktop or other ways of doing this, doesn't matter which platform you're on. The script should run and everything should be there. So the resource group that we created over here was the Ranger VNet RG, and that was the script that we had run. Okay, so I'm not going to waste any more time, and we are going to go now and get started with Azure CLI. And before that, I'm going to go ahead and I'll do this from the portal. I'll show you how to delete that. We have done that in the previous session. All these resources were created. I'm going to go to delete resource group. And like I mentioned, think about it a lot before you actually get started with this. Play, paste it over here, and we should click on delete. You can use the commandlet that I showed you earlier over here to do this, remember? The remove, but I'm just doing this from the portal. Okay, so let's go ahead and delete that and make everything clean for our next portion of things, which is doing this with Azure CLI 2.0. Okay, so let's get started with that. All right, so we're back to the slides. So this is the Azure networking using PowerShell. This is what we just completed. And let's move on to the next slide. So this is going to be Azure networking using the Azure CLI 2.0. So CLI has been around for a little while. There's version 1 something, and now it's version 2. So you should be using that. Similar to the previous one, you can notice the similarities here, right? The first thing we are doing is creating the resource group, and the way you do that in CLI is AZ or AZ, however you call it. So AZ group create. This is how we are creating the resource group with a subnet. We are basically saying AZ network VNet subnet create. Then create a new Azure VNet, Azure Network VNet create. Similarly, the public IP address and network interfaces. Okay, so we are going to go and see the script very similar to how I did the last one. We did it in PowerShell. We are now going to do it in CLI. So back to my portal. As usual, only the Cloud Shell over here. I mean, that's the resource group we created for the Cloud Shell. So if you remember in the Cloud Shell, we are in PowerShell. The way we are going to do that in CLI is going to use the bash command shell, okay? And for you Linux folks, you're probably already very used to it. Click on that and it will restart the Cloud Shell and it will take you to the bash mode over here. So it's connecting to the terminal and here you are. So if you are doing this, once again, if you watch my previous module, I show you how to do that from your Linux systems. As long as you create, I mean, you can run this command AZ over here, and this shows up. Azure shows up means you are ready to go. Okay, so you can see that it's already there in the Cloud Shell. Obviously, under Bash, it's already all there. This also hooks up to your, I mean, it's already has you authenticated and authorized, so you should be okay as well. Okay, so clear the screen. So let's go to Visual Studio Code. I'm going to open the file. This one, you remember the previous one was vnet.ps1 because this was PowerShell. AZCLI with this extension is the file which we are going to use for this one. So like a typical bash script, and you may might as well, I mean, by now you got the idea that I'm probably going to run these commands one at a time, but eventually this can be run as an entire bash script, right? That's why I started with that. Similar to the previous one, az login. I mean, with the other one we had to log in as well. I have this commented. If you're doing this from your system, you probably have to log in first, but for now we're going to just start with this. Okay, so this is the entire script. Very similar to last one, except that this is actually uh, using the Azure CLI. So the very first thing, we have two variable names, just like the last one. Um, with this one, I'm calling it RG name and location. Unlike PowerShell, the variables in this script do not have the dollar sign. So notice that, right? It doesn't have the dollar sign. So we're going to take these two lines first and create, I mean, get the variables going first. So I'm going to come to the shell, similar to last time. We're going to go like this. And I'm going to go a little fast in this example because it's the idea is very similar. AZ or AZ group create. This is where we are creating the resource group with these two variables. Let's go and do that over here. And once we do that, the output of this is actually like a JSON output, right? It's actually telling you that this has succeeded. So if we go over here, we'll see the resource group has been created. Right now, there's nothing. The virtual networks and everything, it should be empty. So let's create the virtual network with the first subnet. So in this one, I'm not creating the subnet configuration first. I'm creating the virtual network directly with AZ network vnet create. And the backslash is like similar to the other one where we had that little apostrophe there. This backslash over here means that just use a new line. End of the day, this is one large command. I could have done this all in one line without these backslashes. Okay, but the backslash is saying that I'm using a new line. What it does is it's create the readability a little better, right? I mean, I can see that I'm creating the name, resource group, location, just to make the readability a little better. I'm using that. If you want, you can remove the backslashes and make this one long command over here. I believe this is an easy way to read it. So what we are saying is that the name of the virtual machine is going to be VNet. The resource group is going to be here. We are using the dollar sign, that this variable, whatever we have over here, and the location as well. This is the address space, if you recall, for a virtual machine. And we are saying that while you create this virtual network, create the first subnet. So we are giving the subnet parameter over here and the prefix parameter over here as well. So let's go ahead and run this. Press enter. And it should come back creating the virtual network with the first subnet for us. So let's see if it's actually, yep, it's actually started to create that. Um, it will come back with an output saying that what are all the things that are there. So here, unlike the PowerShell one, we created it with the subnet. Now we are saying that, hey, this virtual network is created with this subnet. Now create the second subnet. So the way you do that is AZ network VNet subnet create. So we are saying that create a subnet within the VNet, right? The address prefix of that is 10.3.2. It's going to be called my subnet 2, the resource group name, and it's asking which virtual network you want to create that subnet in. We are saying VNet name, my VNet, right? So this is very self-explanatory. I'm not spending too much time over here. Just be careful or understand how the syntax works, right? And how the syntax works in comparison to how the virtual network is. So as you can see, the virtual network has been created. It actually gave this JSON output, JSON type output over here saying that new VNet, the address space was this. Um, as you can see, DDoS protection plan was null. It's using the DNS option, the Azure specified DNS. You can see the provision state is succeeded, so it actually has succeeded. Um, It's providing all that information. It's also saying that, hey, we are creating one subnet over here, and that's the address prefix, right? So let's go ahead and create the second subnet over here. I'm going to copy that just once again. Um, let's go over here and create the second subnet. So right now, if we come in the VNet, we should have one subnet. Yep, we have one subnet here. So let's go ahead and press enter on this one and create the second subnet. It should be created momentarily. As you can see, it's saying running. So we'll wait for it to come back. I'm pretty sure, let's move around, come back here. As you can see, my subnet 2 has been created right now. We're just waiting for this command to finish, and it has finished. As you can see, it came with 1032, that's the one. The provision state for this should be succeeded. And looks like everything, yeah, succeeded. Resource group, it's basically saying that it's all done properly and there is no issue. Okay, so the next thing, as like the previous one in PowerShell, we're going to create public IP addresses. The way we do that is AZ network public IP create. This is the resource group, and the name, if you remember, is all the same. So we're going to take this stuff over here. Guys, I'm going too fast on this, and there's no way to get your feedback and slow down. But what I'm saying is that it's pretty self-explanatory, right? Remember these commands. So let's go ahead and do this. And I'm going to create the first public IP address, the second one and third one. So if you go to the public IP address over here, as you can see, it's already working on the first one. First one is done. Now, with the third one, as you can see over here, it's actually, when you paste that, it did the first two. So I'm pretty sure the first two are already here. It hasn't created the third one because it's waiting for us to press enter. So press enter. And very similar to last time, we should come over here and we should see that it's already all created. So, doesn't take too long to create this. Okay, there you go. All three are created over here. So it should come with an output, and the output says for this one, for example, the provision state is succeeded. That's the one I want to look at, the name over here, and everything else. Cool. So next, we create the network interface cards. How will we do that over here? It's AZ network NIC create. And for this NIC, what do we need? We need the resource group. We need the name. We are telling it that it should be in the virtual network my VNet. It should be part of the subnet my subnet 1. And it's going to take this public IP address and associated with it, and this private IP address and associated with it. So we know that looking at that we are creating the network interface card for this virtual machine over here. Very similar to that, we are creating one for server 2 and we are creating one for server 3. Okay. And over here, we just remember the parameters: resource group name, VNet, subnet, public IP, and private IP. I'm going to take all three together and create all the NICs. So let's copy all of that. Come over here. We know under network interface cards, nothing is here right now, but let's go ahead. I'm going to clear the screen a little bit here and paste the whole thing. Takes a little bit of time. It goes and creates the network interface card, gives it a name, associates with the public IP address we just created, gives it a static IP address 10315. So let's see if it's actually showing up here. Yeah, it's showing up. It's already working. Obviously not attached to anything yet. So we'll wait for this to come back. All right, similar to last one, this one is actually waiting for an enter on the last one. We press enter. Let's see what happens here. So we know we'll be creating. So as soon as it creates, you can see it spews out this entire configuration, and you can see it has succeeded. This was the second one, 10316. It's a static IP address. So read through this and familiarize yourself. On this, obviously in this lesson, I'm trying to make this short, but look at this for this one time, and you don't have to read it every single time, everything, but just to read that, what is it saying? What are the different stuff that was available to it? What did it provision? How did it succeed? And as you can see, the third one has been created as well. If I go over here, do this, it's already done. Okay, this is good. This is really, really good. Now, once again, you see this line over here. That means that for this lesson, to create networking point of view, everything is done. But once again, we're going to find out how to create the virtual machines and attach them to that. So unlike the PowerShell, I couldn't find a nice way to do this without putting a password in here, this is where you can actually put a password for the admin password for the virtual machines. In the previous one, you couldn't obviously see this password because we had PowerShell prompt for it. I couldn't find a way to do that in Azure CLI. Maybe there is a way. I did not invest too much time. But what really we should concentrate over here is creating the server 1, 2, and 3. The command for that is azvm create, means virtual machine create. We need the resource group, we need the name of the server, the location of the server. This is where you can see we're putting the NICs over here, the server one NIC, the one that we just created over here. So this NIC needs to be attached to this virtual machine. We are saying the image for this is going to be 2016 data center Windows server. The size is going to be standard DS2. I'm saying the username is Sean. You can put whatever you want. And the admin password, as you can see, this is a variable, so it's a dollar sign. We are taking this as the password for the virtual machine. In real world, you probably want to do this, I mean, have another password obviously, and make sure that this is hidden because you don't want people to just get hold of your password. But for our purposes, all we are doing is creating a virtual machine in that way. And similarly, in second one, it's a server 2. Everything should be same. The nick of this should be server 2, right? In the server 1, the nick for this is server 3. So let's take this whole thing here. I want to show one last thing over here. That is, you can see that there is one parameter over here that says no wait. If you remember in PowerShell, when we are doing this, we had to wait for each virtual machine to complete to get to the command prompt, which is something maybe you want. With this one, we are saying do not wait for this virtual machine to create, but keep moving. That means we should be having these 3 virtual machines being created at the same time. So we reduce the time for first one. Let's say it takes 5 minutes, second one takes another 5 minutes, the third one takes another 5 minutes. It takes you 15 minutes for all the virtual machines. With this one, you could reduce it to all happening at once. So in maybe 5 minutes, we'll have all 3 virtual machines. Now, I was talking to a colleague and we discussed this. In PowerShell, there is a way to even do what, in Linux we are doing with the no wait or with Azure CLI. It's like creating a job and putting that in a job for creating those virtual machines. It's a little complicated, so I did not want to go through it. But in Azure CLI, it's not too complicated. You can just put the parameter no wait. If you didn't put the no wait parameter, it would just create just like PowerShell one at a time. So let's go ahead and run this. Over here, I want to clear the screen once again. I like it nice and clean here. Let's go create that. So seems like there's an error. Let's see. Expected one argument. So it did not create our virtual machines. What is going on here? One argument. Okay, admin password. Isn't it admin password? Admin password. Let's see why this is not working. It's nice when this troubleshooting things happen during the session. I mean, it takes a little bit of time to figure this out, but I want to know what happened here. I did put admin password, no wait, but it's having an issue with that. Let me troubleshoot that. Expected one argument. So I did put one argument. Why is it saying that? There's more than one here. Okay, let's try this once again. Nope. Looks like I have to pause and troubleshoot a little bit over here to figure out what happened here. Give me one. So I must say, this took me a little while to figure out what was going on. I think when I pasted admin password, uh, the admin password, my complex password, there might have been a space character or something like that. It obviously took it right now. As you can see, I didn't change anything. And over here, yeah, it should be creating the virtual machine right now. So let me try this other two directly. So all I did was restart the Cloud Shell. And as you can see, then I just made sure my variables were there for the resource group and location, and I put the admin password and it just started working. So let me take this other two. So with the no wait in there, I shouldn't have any problem. Press enter. So these 3 virtual machines. So yeah, as you can see, I did not have to wait for the virtual machines to be created for the command prompt to come back. It already came back here. Um, So if I come over here, I should see all these virtual machines are all creating at the same time. So that no wait, the no wait parameter, helps doing that. So technically that's it, folks. I mean, this should create the virtual machines, and you should see over here everything running in a bit. Okay, so I'm going to pause and come back and show you one last thing, which is how to have this thing run completely as a script. That's what I really mean. So I have commented everything that I really don't need. I can already show you. So while this creates, let's not waste time. While this creates, as you can see, my command prompt is back, so I'm free to really do anything here. So let's do ls, and we can see what all are there in this directory. Similar to the PowerShell, we're going to upload a file, right? And this time we're going to upload the AGCLI file that's over here. Once this is completed, if I do ls right now, I should see the AGCLI. So there are a couple of things you need to do over here. Let me clear the screen. There are a couple of things you need to do over here for this to work. First, you need to rename this vnet.agcli as a shell script. So I'm going to do that with this vnet.agcli. I need to name this to vnet.sh. So this is going to become a shell script. ls that. Of course, vnet.sh is over here, which is great. Now, what I'm going to do is, if I do ll, you can see this is not an executable. So let's make it an executable file in Linux using Linux command chmod +x. I'm going to just do vnet .sh. So this will become an executable. Okay, so if I do ll right now, vnet.sh, it's an executable. So technically, all I have to do right now is vnet.sh, and this should start working. Similar to PowerShell, now we can use this entire script to actually do anything. I mean, run it on its own and do everything that we really want it to do. Okay, so let me see if these ones were created, because we have to, once this is created, we need to delete that and we need to run this script that way. So I have everything ready here. I'm going to just pause it. Once everything is out and clean, we'll run this again, and I'll show you how an entire script can be used to build this entire environment. And we have automated deployment through infrastructure as code, right? Okay, see you soon. All right, so previous virtual machines have been running. So the way to deal with this is that we need to go and delete this resource group and clean everything up before we go run our ultimate script. So let's go ahead and delete this resource group, okay? So once that is done, we'll be running the entire script. So let's wait for this. All right, so everything is cleaned up over here. So let's go to the Cloud Shell. Oops, looks like it has timed out. Let's actually log back in. And as you remember, guys, all we are doing is now running this script all at once, okay? So I'm not probably going to wait for finishing the whole thing, but I'm going to show you how it's done. So our script, our script vnet.sh over here, as you can see, it's executable. So we have done everything. So let's go and run that. As you can see, we are starting to see some outputs here already, means that things are being built as the script runs. So if we come to the resource groups, obviously we're going to see the resource group show up here, just like last time. Virtual networks, it's already created. Public IP address, it's being created right now. Well, it's got created. Network interface, the first one is created. It's probably working on the second and third one. Eventually, this entire environment will get created over there, right? So let's go see over here. I'm not going to wait for this any longer. Let it just create. Okay, but this is, once again, I explained in the previous PowerShell one that this is one way with this script. Now you can just give it to all your folks or even yourself when you are doing this lab, right? Just keep it handy. It's one way of building the entire infrastructure through infrastructure as code. I hope this has been quite helpful to you guys, okay? So we did the PowerShell. These are the commands that you need for the Azure CLI. I'm going to end it over here, guys. I think I've shown enough. Try it yourself. Look at the script. They'll be there on GitHub so you can see what's going on. All right, that concludes this lesson. guys, as usual, the training site, cloudranger.net, YouTube, this is where you are probably viewing it right now. I'm going to post the slides on slideshare.net. Connect with me or follow me on Twitter at Sean Ismail. GitHub is where all the scripts and everything will be for you, and connect with me on LinkedIn as well. And guys, one request to you folks, nominate me as a Microsoft MVP. This is the link you need to go to actually nominate me there. You just basically go there and nominate someone. Someone messaged me on YouTube comments that, hey, they actually want your email address when we do that. So this is the email address that you need to put in there when they ask you. If you can do this, that would be great. I would really, really appreciate it if you do so. Okay. And thank you for viewing. Please like the videos if you think it's been helpful for you on YouTube, and please subscribe as well so you can keep updated on when my new videos come out. I would really appreciate it if you do so. Do leave comments. That would be great as well. I'm hoping through these lessons, this is not only going to help you pass your exam to a point, but also help you at work, build your career and take it from there. Okay. Thank you guys. I'll see you on the next one.